I feel like we should have a new segment on the show called Tariff Alert, like if there's been any news, because it could change every day. Change a little bit today. If you have not heard, I will mention this off the top before we talk about, what the implications are of tariffs, which are now in effect. But today we learned just a little earlier this afternoon that there will be a 1-month delay, but only as far as the auto sector is concerned. So for one more month, the tariffs announced by Donald Trump 2 days ago will remain, or they'll be exempt as far as the auto sector is concerned, but only for a month. And then I guess they'll decide what they want to do after that. In the meantime, everything else that was talked about and has been introduced remains in effect. And as I said before, just before the news, the one word I'm starting to hear now, because let's face it, we've heard from prime ministers across the country. We heard from the Prime Minister of Canada, from Justin Trudeau the other day, suggesting, look, there is going to be some pain to be felt. And I think for all, if I read between the lines, Donald Trump sort of alluded to the same thing, right? Saying that for a while things may be, he didn't use that word, but he implied that there might be a small price to pay for American citizens once these tariffs are in effect, but kind of implying that it's only a short-term pain for hopefully a long-term gain. But in Canada, the word I'm starting to hear and read in articles now is recession. That if these U.S. tariffs stay in place, that's what we can expect. That's what Canadian economists are saying. And one of them is Nguyen. She's an RCMP Canada economist and is on the line. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let me begin by asking, recession is that ugly word that nobody wants to even hear or consider. So why do you think we end up here if these tariffs, first of all, remain in effect, because they're in effect right now? And what's the timeline if, for example, they last for a week or a month or 6 months? How does that work?
No, so let's begin with the scenario that we started with yesterday. So if we have a 25% tariff on all Canadian exports into the U.S., and if that stays in place for the next 6 months in a year, and with 10% on energy, then we expect a recession to come as early as in 6 months. And the only reason why we say 6 months is because it takes 6 months or 2 quarters to declare a recession. So we need 2 quarters of data that show decreasing in economic activities. The reason why we got here is that Canada exports, about 75% of Canadian exports go to the U.S. So our economy is incredibly intertwined with the U.S. economy. And when there are tariffs, that means that demand for Canadian goods will go down, and that affects jobs. In Canada, it makes prices of goods more expensive because Canada is also implementing retaliation. Now, having said that, though, we just heard that there is a 1-month delay on auto, so who knows in the upcoming days and weeks if there will be other exemptions or changes that might lift the recession risk that we are seeing right now.
Okay, with respect to the retaliatory tariffs that Canada has announced, I understand that if this were just a one-way street and we were paying tariffs but not collecting any tariffs going the other way, that, we could end up, in a recession fairly soon. Does the write-off between what we use as retaliatory tariffs and what we pay, does that not come into play at all?
So the retaliation is meant to raise revenue, given the fact that there will be, part of it is also to encourage the U.S. government to enter a negotiation to hopefully arrive at another tariff-free, tax-free agreement. That's the ultimate goal. But also the retaliation is meant to also raise revenue, and hopefully part of that revenue is then be used to help struggling businesses and households to ease the pain of tariffs.
Okay. I would ask, maybe it's an unfair question to ask, given that this is what we're looking at, what can we do to sort of minimize the pain here?
Oh my gosh, it all depends. I think one difficult thing is that it's really challenging for businesses and for households and for everyday Canadians to plan ahead when we don't know what is going to happen. For businesses, what can be done is to try to diversify our trade partners. I think for decades, Canada has been increasingly relying on the U.S. as the major consumer, which was fine when everything was going well. But now we may be realizing that diversification is good. Provinces and the federal government have been trying to break down into provincial trade barriers, So that would allow more free trade within Canada. So that also would, in the long term, help the economy. Obviously, all of this is going to take a while. And in the consumer sector, we are seeing that consumers are switching to buy Canadian products, so which these products are not going to be affected by tariffs. Their prices are not increasing. So that's one way that we're seeing everyday Canadians acting to ease the pain of tariffs whenever that happens.
I wonder, too, you bring up interprovincial trade, and obviously this is something, that we're talking about seriously now. Some people say, great, we're talking about it, but nothing has happened. I mean, if this was free trade across the country, do we have a number for what that would do as far as the economy is concerned, how much that would help the economy?
So I don't have a number on top of my head. Now, given that it's going to really help the economy, but because it takes time, it's not going to prevent this coming recession that is happening this year if tariffs stay in place. Because it takes time, I think the real impact is going to come in the next 2 years or so. And I think, it's fair to say that some things are already happening. We've seen that Ottawa has already been, I think about half of all the interprovincial trade barriers actively being removed or have already been removed. So that's extraordinary given that these barriers were in place for decades. So this is good progress. We obviously can do better, and hopefully it's going to, more barriers will be removed and there will be more free trade within Canada.
Can I ask a question that doesn't necessarily relate to this, but it came up again the other day when Donald Trump mentioned, the reason he's, of course, doing this, if you believe the fentanyl thing is one, he brought up this idea of American banks not being able to, come to Canada or do business in Canada. And we know that there are American banks. Did I say Canadian banks? I meant American banks. There are American banks, 15 or 16 different kinds of banks operating out of this country. Can you explain what he meant by that? Do you have any idea what that was about?
The statement was, if you were to fact check them, which you did, that statement is simply not correct. There are American banks operating in Canada. More of them choose not to because Canadian regulations in the banking sector are a lot stricter, which means that it might be more difficult to turn a hefty profit. But I think the upside of that is that we avoided the worst of the financial crisis in 2008. So those regulations are in there for a reason. There is nothing explicitly preventing American banks to operate in Canada.
So it is that for people who don't understand, our banking regulations here are a lot tighter. You mentioned the 08-09 financial crisis, and that's why our Canadian banks, our economy, ended up doing better than most other places, certainly better than the U.S. at the time. So it's not a matter of not allowing them in. It's a matter of them, as you just said, not deciding that they want to follow the rules that would have to be in place if they wanted to operate here.
That is right.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it at that. I thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nguyen from RSM Canada on that word, on that recession. What you say, well, technically 2 consecutive quarters of a shrinking, economy, that marks a recession. Could that happen? Apparently it can. And the tariffs would just make that go, I guess, make it happen even faster.